let's take a look.
All right, that was me. Hi, this is Angie.
Hey,
It
Angie.
doesn't look like it's recording, and I'm just worried. I'm going to have to go take care of my son, and I'm worried about missing something. I wasn't sure if it was being recorded or not.
Well, I tell you what, Angie,
Actually,
oh, there it goes. I see it. It says recording. Sorry.
actually, it does say recording. So
okay. All right. So we're good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. So school readiness. When I sit down with education teams to talk about a student, they want to know what are that student's present levels? You know, what does this kid know? Does he have, and obviously depending on the age of the child, we're going to have different skill levels. But you know, if we're talking about early elementary, you know, does this kiddo know, you know, the basics, shapes and colors and counting and letters? And obviously as we advance more, they want to know about reading levels, comprehension, any social studies and sciences knowledge, etc. They want to get some kind of idea of a basic foundation. Now, our kiddos get assessed just like everybody else. They have to go through that assessment process in order to have an IEP, in order to develop goals that we put on the IEP that are appropriate for that learner. But all of you guys know, because you've been in the school system at all yet, we know that standardized assessments, more often than not, do not accurately reflect your child's abilities or understanding of content. Unfortunately, because it's such a rigid program, I've been in assessment rooms with a student that I know knows a whole lot more than he's able to express in that environment because it's so rigid. They can't ask questions twice. They can't provide multi-sensory opportunities to show your understanding. They can't make an accommodation to, you know, enlarge a font so that student can see it better and access it better, or limit the questions to a page or problems to a page, because that student learns better without all of the visually distracting numbers or letters on a page. So our kiddos are already set up for a big challenge when it comes to these standardized assessments. And unfortunately, the team most of the time has a much lower threshold. They don't have a clear understanding or full understanding about the student's full skills and abilities, and therefore a lot of times there's a lower threshold when it comes to, you know, present levels and goals. And so it's important for you as a parent, especially, and a caregiver, especially now that we've been at home with kids since March. You've been having to work one-on-one with your kiddo probably more than you have ever had to do in your life. And you're starting to learn a lot more about what your kiddo knows. Now, that being said, you're also your kid's best expert. You've been working with your child, and you do understand more than any specialist on that IEP team what your child is capable of. So in order for you to make sure that those IEP goals are going to be appropriate, in order for you to make sure those teachers and education teams understand what your child knows, it's important for you to find out ways to be able to document that. And we're going to go through more of that, but academics and cognitive skills is something that they definitely want to know about. Communication, expressive and receptive communication. Self-help, adaptive skills. They want to know what this kiddo can do independently, what the student is capable of doing, and how, if this student is capable of navigating these self-help skills independently, or if they need assistance. Behavior. We all know behavior comes up a lot, and we're going to get more into that as well. Social skills, you know, is this a social kiddo? Or what are that child's present levels when it comes to social, emotional learning, social skills, making meaningful connections with peers. And then there's some other things that teachers will always benefit from knowing. I call it the need to know info. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. And all of those things create a holistic picture of how ready your kiddo is, right, for school. So let's break them down into those sections. And I'm going to try to give you some recommendations and suggestions on how you can create and document where your kiddo is in each of these sections, so that you can communicate that to his school team and advocate for his needs. So with academics and cognitive skills, so we talked about present levels. It's super important for you to have a good understanding about what your child knows. I'm not asking you to sit around with, you know, big intensive checklists and mark things every single day. Some of you are comfortable with doing that. Some of you simply don't have the time. But when you are working on academics, you know, try to note, you know, where your kiddo is, where present levels, you know, do they recognize all the letters of the alphabet, some of the letters of the alphabet, only capital letters, only lowercase. Start to gain an understanding about that. Can your child recognize numbers 1 through 20, 1 through 10, 1 through 5? What's emerging? What are areas of need? And then again, document and record. I don't know how many IEP consults I've done where the parent is so frustrated because the team says that the child's not making appropriate progress, and yet because they're not reaching this IEP goal, and the parent understands very clearly that this child has absolutely conquered this IEP goal. She sees it every day at home. Well, without documentation or possibly like recording that so that you can show the team, hey, the way we're doing this and in this environment, my child does demonstrate an understanding. So how can we work together to help facilitate, you know, or recreate that kind of instruction or a way to engage my child so that he is able to express his understanding in the school environment as well. So by understanding present levels, by documenting and recording examples of those levels, you're going to be able to advocate for where your child is cognitively so that you guys can create those appropriate IEP goals. We want to hold our kids to high standards, and we want to presume competence. Sorry. So next we want to, it's important that you understand your child's learning style. And what I mean by that are, you know, what are your child's strengths? Is he a strong visual learner? Does your child benefit from multisensory opportunities or real life learning experiences? Most of the time, that is the case for our learners with Down syndrome. We know that they are strong visual learners. We know that multisensory learning opportunities are beneficial for them. Attaching it to a real life experience is super helpful. We know that repetition and consistency benefit that learner. So understanding the things that the way your child learns best, and you're experiencing that by trial and error at home, finding out different ways. And if you've joined us for previous teach workshops, and if you haven't, we do have PDFs available on our DSEA homepage, but we had an effective teaching strategies workshop. So if you joined us for that and have been trying out different methods of engaging your child and different ways to help keep your child motivated to learn, those are things and experiences that you're going to be able to take with you and communicate to the school. So make sure that you're documenting that for yourself, writing it down so that you can communicate. This is how my child learns. This is the most effective way for my child to learn and access curriculum and content. Also, it's important to understand effective methods of instruction, right? And if that's everything from, you know, yes, we need visual reinforcement all along the way. That's definitely something. My child's a visual learner, so an effective method of instruction is to make sure it's not just a lecture, that we've got visual icons or, you know, Cliff's Notes, if you will, with pictures that attach to key vocabulary words, you know, just understanding how your child is able to engage and access that content through visual reinforcement, or maybe they need explicit one-step directions at a time. Multisensory tools. Maybe your child has been working on Pneumicon this summer and through the school year so far. Maybe your child is, you guys subscribe to the Natalie Hale reading program, and that's really, her approach is really working. And so understanding those things are going to open up that conversation for your school to be, you know, to hear what you have to say and maybe be open to trying those approaches at school as well, since we know that they're effective for your child. So just having an understanding about those things is really important. Think about appropriate accommodations that will help your child access content. So whether that's my child would benefit from preferred seating, so to limit other distractions around the room, to be able to focus on content, to be able to be a little closer to the teacher and feel a little more involved, to be able to just access the content because maybe there's a visual a challenge or impairment. And so understanding different accommodations that will help your child access, thinking of those ahead of time so that you are trying, you're preparing as much as possible. Reminding, that your child needs extra processing time. You may benefit from peer support. So we want to think about different accommodations that would work for your child to help make that transition into the classroom a little more smooth. And we're going to go through this with every single subject that we cover. What communication support does your child need to access the content and express understanding? So we know that communication is huge, and without the tools to communicate, if your child does not express him or herself verbally, we want to make sure that that's in place. And so communication is going to be the common thread that we see throughout each of these key topics. We want to make sure our kiddos have those tools. So with communication, that's another huge one, right? So the team wants to know, how does the student communicate? How does the student express himself? How does the student, how can we help the student, with comprehension, with their receptive language skills? And so that's huge. It's very important as a parent or a caregiver that you understand your child's present levels of expressive communication. So whether they are verbally expressive, they use approximations, they use gestures or sign language, low-tech tools or high-tech tools, or a combination of several of those things. It's important that you have a clear idea that you can communicate what your child uses to express himself. And of course, we all work with specialists, right? Most of our kiddos have a speech and language pathologist they're working with. Some of our kiddos are working with an oral motor therapist. Some of our kiddos have had AAC assessments and are working with an AAC specialist. But again, you've been with your child since March. You know your child better than anyone else around, and you are going to be your child's best expert and best advocate. So make sure that you understand that what you have to communicate is super, super important. And we can't always rely on the assessments of specialists, especially now that you've been the one being the primary teacher basically since March. So it's important that you have a good understanding about those present levels, as well as understanding where your student is, your child is with receptive communication. We want to know, what are those comprehension levels? A good way to kind of test that is, easy reading comprehension questions, who, what, when, why, where, following directives. So understanding how many directions can my kiddo follow at a time. We start with one and build from there. But just understanding, question and answer, a simple question and answer, trying to elicit meaningful responses. But so having a good understanding about what your child comprehends is very important, because unfortunately, even educators don't always realize that expressive receptive gap, communication gap. And unfortunately, I've heard the tales, where a teacher will talk about a student with a disability who has an expressive communication challenge as if that student does not understand, because that student can't expressively communicate at that point. And so unfortunately, they don't always accurately assess a child's receptive language capabilities. So that's important as well for you all to make sure that teacher understands, just because my kiddo is having a difficult time expressing himself verbally doesn't mean he doesn't understand what's being said around him, and give him a little credit for that. As a matter of fact, I have some strategies you can use, such as the 10-second rule. Once you give a directive, please count silently to 10 in your head and give my child an opportunity to give you, to elicit a meaningful answer. So understanding those effective communication strategies: short, explicit, one-step or two-step directives, remembering that processing delay and giving time for the child to be able to provide a meaningful answer. Use visual aids as reinforcement. You can never get enough of that. So understanding and being able to communicate those strategies as you've seen how they've been effective in your home school environment. And then if you haven't already and you feel that your child is struggling with communication, struggling with expressive communication, that there are significant delays there, then you always can request an AAC evaluation to see what type of communication support, whether that's low tech to high tech support that the district can actually help provide and train you so that you can even increase communication and build communication skills, not only at school, but home and across other environments as well. So self-help adaptive skills. This is another thing that our education teams need to know or want to know. Is this child able to complete a bathroom routine independently? Well, there are lots of factors for that. Toileting readiness is not always something that comes very naturally. Most of the time, our kiddos, they do end up becoming toilet trained and ready, but it may take more time than it takes, a typical child. And so being able to communicate that and let them know that that's part of that disability, the readiness piece, that there's a lot to it, but that we have to remain patient, and that the ability to complete a bathroom routine should not hinder a child's opportunity to participate in general education. You just have to have the right supports in place for that. Hand washing, so all of those toileting routines that require, that require some independence or some support to try to foster independence, but may take more time for your kiddos. They also require fine motor. It requires fine motor work that is also, often a struggle for our kids. So like unpacking and packing a backpack and a lunchbox, it's that zipping, those fine motor skills that we need. Eating snacks and lunches independently. So being able to, open things in the lunchbox, be able to open the bags or open boxes, or be able to ask for help and advocate if they need help with those things. Or maybe they can work well with a sibling at home. So you could say, hey, with peer support, they may be able to. Of course, this is if you can be next to a peer at that point. Let's see. Also, again, so communication. What kind of communication supports do you need that will help foster independence? So you can say, this is what my child uses at lunchtime, whether it's a high-tech device that can request help or request the kind of food he needs, or it might just be a placemat that has different visual reminders of what that child can ask for if he needs help, or a reminder of the steps that it takes to complete this particular routine. So those are some things to just think about that you can communicate with your education team. And again, just remembering to communicate the challenges that come with hypotonia. I can't tell you how many educators I've talked with who support a student with Down syndrome in the classroom who actually did not even know about hypotonia. They didn't realize that they need the extra support, that they have looser, stretchier muscles in their bodies that, that will make it more challenging to complete fine motor tasks, gross motor tasks, just sitting up, sitting crisscross on a rug for circle time, or sitting in your chair. And then of course, being able to communicate expressively. So all of those things that seem kind of like common sense to us, a lot of times these school teams just really, they're bogged down. They've got a lot to do, and they've got a lot of students and classroom to manage, and they don't always actually know these things. So just being mindful about the things that you can express to your team that will help them empathize with this student, and not just think the student is being non-compliant or too tired or bored, or just isn't toileting because he's stubborn, you know. Them being able to understand why these things happen will hopefully help them empathize and then be more motivated to try to find the supports that that child will need in order to be successful with those self-help and adaptive skills. Behavior, this is a big one. So with behavior, I think this is also important for you to note for yourself. And so the way I would suggest this with all of these key topics, it's kind of like if you envision just having a bold header of each of these core components, and then you just kind of brainstorming and then eventually cleaning it up into bullet pointed, like highlighted bullet points of all of the different things that should be communicated, the key things that should be communicated about each subject, so that you have those for yourself. It's kind of like your own Cliff's Notes that you can refer to. And then you can also clearly then be able to provide feedback from your experiences, feedback about present levels, and feedback about strategies. And so I think that just having that information all together for yourself is helpful, not only, you know, to be able to provide that information for the team, but also because for right now, most of you are going to be your kiddos' teachers again, at least right for the time being. So having those things in your own mind and having those bullet points kind of fresh in your mind may actually help you as well. Be able to help your kiddo navigate this distance learning environment. So with behavior, again, you just want to be able to identify and understand some of these common behavioral challenges. For those of you who joined us in our Teach workshop about behavior, we talked about the ABCs, understanding the antecedents, which is the thing that happens right before the behavior occurs, understanding, you know, observing the behavior, and then observing the consequences so that you can figure out what the function of that behavior is. So the more you understand a little bit more about the common behavioral challenges and that you have, and with those, if you've been able to utilize certain strategies that have been effective in helping to reduce or avoid these behaviors and support more positive behaviors, then those are things that would be really important. You don't want these guys, you know, going through trial and error. One of the biggest concerns we have when we have kiddos in the classroom, and I have education teams calling or parents calling frantic because educators are saying, your kiddo is not behaving, it's distracting to the rest of the class, I don't know if this placement is correct. And so understanding and having a good grasp on the behaviors that you might anticipate could happen in a classroom setting, and having a short list of strategies that have been effective while you've been working with your kiddo at home is going to save them a lot of time and trouble, and hopefully save you guys, you know, those hard IEP meetings where they're like, we've got to get a hold of this or else, you know, we've got to start talking about different placement. So being able to communicate those strategies, I listed some examples like sensory breaks, heavy work, providing choices, creative redirection, assigning big helper roles, etc. Those are some of the strategies we covered in our behavior in the week we discussed behavior for our Teach series. Again, big one. Behavior is communication. Behavior is communication. So know what communication tools are effective to support positive behaviors. If we're giving our kiddos an opportunity to communicate and we're giving them tools that they can utilize and that they know are tools to help them communicate, we are going to see a significant reduction in behaviors. So we want to make sure that you have a good idea about what communication tools are effective for helping reduce challenging behaviors, whether that's use of PECs or a device, a communication AAC device that you're working with, if simple schedule, whether you're using a first then reward chart and just using really quick one step directive and a quick reward. little things like that make a big difference. Some of you are using token economy systems or reward systems. So whatever's happening at home, note what's effective, note what's working so that you can communicate that to the team. And then remember to remind your education team, and I always put this as a bullet point, that 95% of the time when I am talking with an education team, or I've sat in on an IEP meeting, or I'm talking with parents, or reading an assessment from a behavior intervention plan, or a functional behavior analysis when they've done the formal FBA, 95% of the time, the two functions of behavior that, or not functions, but reasons like triggers for behavior, are inappropriate demand. So that means that the work and the demand that's being pushed on the child do not align with that child's current levels, present levels, abilities, IEP goals, that perhaps you have a child that's working below grade level, but a teacher or a para, they are still giving them grade level work. Or the demand might be something different where, the student feels anxious because he's being called on randomly, and is not prepared, doesn't have the preparation. And again, there's that processing delay, right? And so all of a sudden there's anxiety, there's that fear of failure, not that feeling of being ill prepared. And so then you might get a behavior out of that demand. So inappropriate demands and inability to appropriately communicate. Those are the two biggest reasons for behaviors that we see in the classroom. So if we help our education teams understand that from the beginning, understand how important it is that the work they're doing is aligned with their goals, and remember that communication, the ability to communicate thoughts, ideas, feelings, that those two things have to be appropriate and in place and working in order for our behaviors to start to really reshape into more appropriate behaviors. And so I think always having that on your Cliff's Notes for yourself so that you can remember to remind the teachers about that, I think that that's invaluable. A lot of teachers just simply don't quite realize that or connect those dots unless it's just being explicitly told to them, communicated. So social skills. I think it's, it's important for teachers to understand what makes your kiddo tick. What are, your kiddo's biggest motivators? What are your kiddo's biggest fears, challenges? Is your child slow to warm? Needs a little extra time to warm up to a group setting or to make friends? Or does your child love being the center of attention? So having an understanding about your child's comfort levels around peers, and the way, they're able to navigate and communicate in those settings, I think is very important. Being able to let a teacher know, and I'll show you an example of a one-pager in a little bit, but being able to share motivators and interests with the teacher is a great way to kind of front load ideas about ways that teacher can help facilitate meaningful connections with other peers. Especially for a student who has expressive or limited expressive communication, they're going to need a little bit of help and a little bit of facilitation to help start making those meaningful connections. So the more your teacher knows about your child and the things that, little quirks or interests and motivators, then the more they're going to be able to say, oh yeah, Will likes to swim. That's right, Tommy, you and Will have something in common. Maybe next time you can work on a project, about swimming when it's all about what we like, what we like to do outside. And so those are just ways to be able to help your teacher gain a better understanding about her student and to use that knowledge and understanding to make to help facilitate meaningful connections with peers. And then again, helping communicate different strategies that will help the child feel included. You can give them ideas, because I tell you, teachers sometimes they're fresh out of ideas. They're just not quite sure. Some teachers, especially in a general ed environment may not have the experience, and therefore it just doesn't come naturally to them. So there are different ways you can communicate things like, you know, peer supports and whatever that's going to look like, of course, in a classroom that's practicing social distancing. Peer supports, helper, leadership roles is a great way to help our kiddos feel like meaningful members of the classroom. Planned circle time participation. So now instead of just calling on Johnny and expecting him to be able to know what the day of the week is, even if he does know the day of the week, it may take him 10 or 15 seconds to process that. And he may feel overwhelmed and have a difficult time coming up with that answer on the spot. So let's think of some ways where we know on Wednesday, it's going to be Johnny's turn. I'm going to call on Johnny, and he'll have a sign that says Wednesday, or he can have a step-by-step talker so he can push a button that says Wednesday, or, you know, he can have a para that can give him verbal modeling or prompt so that he can participate. So just keep in mind, when you know your child's communication levels, then you can start to think about how you can help get creative to help support that meaningful classroom participation. And again, that teacher is not going to know and necessarily be able to come up with all of those ideas. Some of them will. Some of them will have experience with that. But I think it's the more you know and can communicate and feed them with some ideas, then the more options they'll have to help your child participate meaningfully. And then some other need to know items. If you have a student with sensory needs, that's very important. Again, of course, a lot of our kiddos were working with OTs, and an OT is going to be working on, most of the time, it's going to be working on like handwriting, working on like the buttoning and the zipping, those kind of self-help skills, lacing, building blocks and stacking things, etc. But sometimes those sensory needs are not always fully addressed in the classroom setting. So if you have a child that you know has sensory processing challenges that will impact his ability to access learning, access curriculum, participate in the classroom, it's important that you are able to communicate what effective strategies you use at home in order to really help with self-regulation. And so that we did do a sensory workshop as well with Teach. And if you guys have any questions, of course, with any of these topics that we're covering, I'm always happy to help you brainstorm things that you might need to communicate to your education team as well. Does your child have sleep apnea or other medical concerns that will make it more difficult sometimes to access the learning, the curriculum, the participation? Our kiddos that don't get enough sleep are super, super tired, and it's not because they don't want to participate. It just may be really, really sleepy, and those are things that your team need to know. Again, that hypotonia, can't say it enough. Make sure that you know that a fine motor goal on that IEP should never be an academic goal, right? Fine motor is something that we're always going to continue working on, but not all of our kiddos are going to master handwriting and all of the fine motor skills. So just make sure that you're communicating that that's part of their physical disability of hypotonia, and that although those are goals you want to continue working on, it should never prohibit them from participating, in general ed, or for continuing to make academic progress or appropriate progress in that academic setting. That's a fine motor goal. So cognitive processing delay, I always say, please remind your education teams, help them understand that giving your child that 10 to 15 extra seconds to process is imperative. It can make a huge difference. We want to make sure we're eliciting meaningful feedback. And since we know there's that expressive receptive language delay, that we know that there's that gap, we know that most of the time our students do have something to say. And so, but making sure that your education team knows to give them that extra time to process so that they can give you a meaningful answer is really important. And then for you guys, to take a deep breath and remember that your child does not have to have a mastery over any of these key components in order to participate in a general education placement setting. So if you do have a child in a general ed classroom, it's important that you communicate that with the teacher. I have spoken with many general ed teachers who support a child with Down syndrome in her classroom, and didn't realize that that child does not have to be working at grade level. And so it's important that you remember, that you help remind the teacher that your child does not have to be working at grade level in order to participate in that grade and in general education. They just have to be working toward their IEP goals. That's why it's an individualized education plan or program. So those are just kind of key pieces to have to communicate to your education team as reminders. I think that if we can front load this information in a bullet pointed, really efficient, compact way, and be able to give them that information, it's going to save a lot of headache 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road when we're starting, education teams are wondering, why am I seeing behaviors and what's going on? And, I don't know what your child can do because he can't express himself and he's not working up to, at grade level with the rest of my students. So how can I do this? So being able to front load that information, especially now because our kiddos have been out of school, and we don't want it for a month to go by and education teams start talking about a different placement setting because it seems like your child's not transitioning well. I think the more they understand about Down syndrome and about the challenges that are, common in learners with Down syndrome, the more they can empathize, and that we can start proactively planning to support those challenges and to embrace the strengths and to really try to focus on a more strengths-based approach while being mindful of the challenges that come with a physical and cognitive disability. So it's time to prepare. With that, so with each of those components, I would suggest to you, even if you take one of those sections, and just focus on one at a time and just jot down your thoughts, your experiences, your observations, the strategies that have been effective, and just take it one at a time and just jot those things down. I think it's going to really be helpful for you. It's going to be a great reference, something that you can refer to and your team can refer to. So that's part of the preparation, because that's going to make you super informed and ready to be able to advocate for your child's needs on all of those levels across environments. Some other things you can do are create one-pagers. So I know a teacher doesn't want to read a book about all of the different strategies for your child. And I'm not asking you to give them a book. I'm asking you or recommending that you yourself have those, have that information handy so that you can communicate it to them as needed. Or if they are interested in seeing all of your different bullet points for each of the sections we just covered, then there, you've got them handy for them. And those are things that they can at least keep in a folder or keep with the IEP. But it's definitely important to create those one-pagers. So we recommend doing like an all about me one-pager that gives a picture of your child. It's going to tell the teacher a little bit about your child's strengths, a little bit about some of the things that work for your child, things that don't work. Giving here, Liam's a little bit older, and so he has a vision statement. His parents have said, this is what we envision for him. And so we're making a connection with that teacher. That teacher's connecting now to a student, not just a student with Down syndrome, but this human being, this person that has dreams and goals and wants to be a meaningful participant in the classroom setting. And these are the things that work for this student. These are some things that are challenging, and these are some ways you can help. And the more you can help teachers understand that, the more they're going to feel supported and more motivated to be able to to make little adjustments, to be able to differentiate their style, to be able to engage in different ways that are going to support your learner. So taking the extra time to create these one-pagers shows your team that you care, and that you want them to view your student just like they view any other student in the classroom. And now they're informed, and now they have the knowledge they need to best support your child. And then the other one is an IEP one-pager, which basically just highlights in more common terms what the goals are. And those are great things to have to give to your education team, to your teacher, to a para, if your child has a para, so that they can, it's a quick reference. They can take a look and see what these IEP goals are. If you're in math time, they can see, okay, here are the math IEP goals. So how can I connect this to my child's IEP, or to my student's IEP? This is what we can be working on, because it's related to his particular goal, but we can still utilize some of the tools and the lesson that they're working on right now. So we can still access the content, but we can shape it so that it's focusing on that child's goals. So having those one-pagers are really great. Again, I don't know how many education teams and paras I've talked to who really aren't that aware of the IEP goals. They don't really come up. They don't have them on a quick list or quick reference list. So it's up to you as parents to create that stuff. And so the more you can front load them with as much information as possible, the less likely you are to gonna have big breakdowns in communication. Finally, we have to think about this, practicing safety standards. So there are going to be safety standards in place and protocols in place when it is finally time for your kiddos to be back in school. And none of us knows exactly what that's going to look like. So I wish I could tell you and give you the formula, but I can't. So all we can do is suggest that you, knowing that our kiddos do rely on repetition and do rely on practice, and do rely on consistency, I would try to utilize as many different opportunities as possible to practice safety standards that you anticipate will be happening at school. So whether you are role playing with family members about staying 6 feet apart, everyone's putting their masks on, using hand sanitizer or washing hands, to help engage our kiddos, maybe some of our younger ones, or even some of our grown-up kiddos. We can practice with toys, with stuffed animals or puppets, putting masks on them, having your child be the teacher and separate the puppets or the toys or the stuffed animals 6 feet apart. Bring out some masking tape and use it as a math, use it as an opportunity to practice math. Write 1 through 6 down in feet and have them practice, have them take the steps. The more we can reinforce these standards through practice and role play, the more accustomed they're going to get to practicing them independently, and which is our goal. We want them to be able to be aware of those. And some of our kiddos have, individuals with Down syndrome struggle a little bit more with reading social cues, a little bit more with kind of having that stop button. Some of our kiddos love to be cuddly, love to give hugs, love high fives. They may seek feedback from other students, etc. So the more you're practicing these things at home and giving your child an opportunity to practice, the more confidence you will have as your child is transitioning into a school environment, that they're going to be able to practice those skills and generalize the things that you practiced into the school environment. Most of our kiddos love music, love to dance, love to sing. So get creative. Make up some songs about washing hands, wearing masks, or staying 6 feet apart. Those are ways that our kiddos learn. And remember that multisensory approach that we're telling our teachers to use. Well, we want to remember that we can use it as well. We can think out of the box and get creative to help our kiddos retain that information and carry it with them across environments. Another great thing to do would be create a social story. Take pictures of your child doing the things, practicing those safety standards, wearing a mask, washing hands, staying 6 feet away. You can take a picture of those stuffed animals 6 feet apart, or a picture of your child walking those 6 feet, or making, making the 6-foot masking tape line. So just get creative with it. So those are some ways to practice those safety standards as we think about what school is going to look like when it is time to finally transition into a classroom. And then don't forget just to work with your team. As a reminder, when you're giving your team this kind of information and you are explaining that, it's important to have healthy homeschool communication practices. You want to be able to practice the things they're practicing at school, at home, because your child does benefit from repetition and consistency. Request progress reports. Normally when report cards are sent out, at least each time report cards are sent out, you should be getting a progress report. You may be able to work with your team to see if you can get a progress report more frequently, because regression is real. Our kiddos will need some extra time to adjust to the back to school life. And some of our kiddos will have experienced some regression. And we want to make sure we're on top of that and communicating that with the team, so that if they are more flexible with providing more frequent homeschool communication, that just to ensure you guys are on the same page and that you can take the things they're working on in school and continue to practice them at home, so that we can get those kiddos back up to where they were, or where they need to be, or where we want them to go, where they want to go. So just being mindful about that and making sure that you're communicating that with your school team. And then remember that we are here. We're here to help you. We're here to help you navigate the IEP process. So please feel free to schedule a consult with me. If you have any questions or concerns about preparing for your next IEP, or your next school meeting that's talking about transitioning back into school, supports and services. I know some of us haven't been getting all of the services that are written on the IEP. And so if you have questions in regards to that, we are here to help. So please don't hesitate to schedule a consult with me, and we can put our heads together about how to best navigate that process, as it's all so kind of novel right now and up in the air. So with that, if I have any questions, Nancy, we've got any questions from folks?
Yeah, hang on a second.
Okay.
Angela, you want to ask your questions?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was getting ready to type it, and I wasn't sure if I should type it in or just ask out loud.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the questions I had is, this was awesome, by the way, Elizabeth. Awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Lots
you
of good information. How with this going back remote, because my school is 100% remote, so a lot of this is geared over when they go back into school. With the remote learning, I'm a full-time employee, or I'm a full-time worker. So is my husband. We struggled through spring, and it was only like 40 minutes and then of a day for the general ed. And then it was like a couple pull-out, Zoom meetings. Well, now the schedule they're telling me now is literally from 8:30 to 12:30 straight with him on Zoom. And they're going to grade and everything else. And what do we as parents have rights in all of this of saying, he can't do all this, we can't do all this? Like, I want him to have an education, but it's too much.
Sure. Yeah. This is, I know, first of all, I hear you. This is definitely, you're echoing the concerns of a lot of parents that we've talked with, who are saying, I'm getting so much work, and we have and I work, the world didn't stop. So you could become a homeschool teacher, and they're not providing you with all the training and tools and support that you need in order to effectively work with your child at home. The best advice we can give, and I do believe at least through the end of the school year this past spring, schools have, flexibility has been, imperative. We've had to be flexible with the schools, and they have to be flexible with you. Now, in all honesty, because your child has an IEP, in an ideal world, what would be happening is you would probably be getting modified schoolwork that's aligned with those IEP goals, and you shouldn't necessarily be held to the same, accountability or the same amount of work or standards or homework or action items as necessarily everybody else. And I think that being able to communicate with your team that because your child, because of your child's learning profile, and because of your circumstances, you aren't able to access a half day every single day of learning, but you would like to work with them to see what you can do to really focus on those key elements of the IEP. We've told parents, if you only can get in 30 minutes a day, you can only get in 30 minutes a day. I mean, there's no one size fits all approach here. And I know schools have to have some sort of consistency. They have to have some sort of plan. They have to have some sort of, organized approach. But I do believe that there's flexibility with that. And it's all about communicating with your team, what you can do, and then working with them to identify the key components of what they're sending home or what they're giving students. That the key things that you need to be working on and making sure you're tackling. So whether that's depending on the age of your child, that might be, sight words, comprehension. It may be, math concepts, some of the things that are just critical academic skills, so that you may have to say, look, these other things are going to have to be shelved because I have limited time. These are my circumstances, and I unfortunately don't have wiggle room with that. My child has, a different learning style, and 4 hours in front of a screen is just simply not realistic. And because he has an IEP, let's take a look at that, and let's hone in on what we can do with the limited amount of time we have to work with you in order to address some of these critical goals that we don't want to see regression in. So does that make sense?
It does. It does. It leads me to two questions. One is, one of the things they said was he's typically graded in general ed as well as, his IEP goals. And so she said, well, let's not grade him in general ed. But in the past, whenever we talked about not grading in general ed, they were pushing that, oh, well, then he should just be in SDC. They don't want him in general ed. We had to fight for it. So if I say, yes, pass on general ed, we're not grading him this one. I mean, does that give them more of a basis to push him into SDC?
No. So first of all, because he has an IEP, he can be on a completely different grading system in general ed. So he should never be graded in relation to the content being taught in general ed, that grade level content. He should never be graded on that. I mean, if he is, then what happens is that our kiddos start looking like they're failing everything, right? Because they're grading them based on those grade level standards, not based on IEP goals. And so that's why when he's participating in grade level general ed, he does not have to be working at grade level. He does not have to complete the same work. His work does not have to look the same. His testing does not have to look the same. His grading does not have to look the same. You can change the what. You can change all of that content to align with his IEP goals. Special ed is not for IEP goals. All of his education is for IEP goals. Okay. And he does not have to be working at grade level at all in order to participate in general ed. And so he doesn't have to not be graded in general ed, but you need to have a conversation about what does our grading look like, because he's not completing the same work as his peers. He's completing his individualized goals, work that's aligned to those individualized goals. So how are we going to grade that?
So Elizabeth, what they should be tracking is the percentage of IEP goals met. It's not really grading. It's not like you get an A, B, C, D.
Well, I mean, you can, right? So there's a lot of flexibility with that. So for example, if he's working on a modified assignment that is, let's say, a science or social studies unit that the whole class is working on, but his actual test has been modified to his IEP goals, so his learning level. So let's say we've now taken it from being text that's, you know, a giant, you know, like 3 pages worth of text that they have to read and answer comprehensions, answer our comprehension questions about. Let's say now we've modified that based on his learning style and his IEP goals to just be 5 vocabulary words tied to that higher level concept, right? And
That's the piece we're missing, and we have been for the last 2 years, is they don't modify the work in general ed. They just give him work that aligns with his goals. And so he's lost in general ed, which is causing problems. So,
yeah.
okay, that makes
So,
sense.
Angie, so I tell you what we can do if you'd like, we can talk a little bit more about this so that you can help them understand that he's entitled to modifications in a general ed setting, and that that's how they should, I mean, our kiddos, unfortunately, it's, this is all too common where general ed teachers are really not aware of modifications, who's doing it, how they're doing it, how the child should be graded. And these are all conversations that, if you know, are front loaded at the beginning and settled upon at IEP meetings, will save a lot of people a lot of time and trouble. So Angie, maybe you and I can schedule a time to connect and talk about this, so you know maybe some things that you could communicate that you need to have, you know, put into IEP so that everyone's on the same page and there's accountability there. Because he should never, they should never hold him to grade level standards.
Yeah, and all they do is remind us he's not at grade level, and that's why he should be in SDC. So yeah, if you can, should I just email you to set up a time to maybe talk? Okay,
Yep,
that'd be great. Because I have other questions. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Thank
I
you.
think that's the best way to go about it. And that's common, just to let you guys know that that's a super common concern and super common challenge with our families who have children participating in general ed, that the teachers think they must then be held to grade level standards, and that's absolutely not the case. Now, that being said, I just want to clarify, if you have a student who is in middle school transitioning into high school, and you want your child to be on diploma track and not just receive a certificate, an alternative diploma, by freshman year, then that student does have to work at grade level standards. If they are participating in general education, they do have to pass all the same tests and work at grade level standards. So no more modifications. They can have accommodations to support, so they can change like the how they test, the how, you know, the how of, but they're still doing the same content. So you can't change the what anymore. So they would be graded the same way. They would be held to the same test standards, etc. Just want to clarify that. But until that freshman year of high school, your kiddos can absolutely participate in general ed without, and be working under grade level, below grade level. Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. Well, folks, I really appreciate you guys taking your time out on a Friday night. And again, we're here for you. So if you come up with any questions, if you have heard now back from your school, like I said, everything's changing day to day, hour to hour, really. But if you need our support and you need have additional questions or want to set up a consult about any of these items or upcoming IEPs or team meetings, please feel free to reach out to me. That's why we're here. And we do appreciate your all's participation, and let us know how we can help you as we're all trying to get through these crazy times.
Have a great week, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. I appreciate your help.
You.
And everyone, thanks so much. Have a great
Thank you,
week.
Elizabeth. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, really good.
Bye, Wanda.
Bye, Nancy.
Hang in there.